happy to welcome back to the podcast Megan McArdle, Washington Post columnist, friend of the pod. Megan, great to see you.
Good to see you too.
Crazy times. Just in the last day, right?
What are you talking about? I don't know what.
Well, just in the last day, we have hints that the China tariffs could be dropped or lowered, or some deal could be reached. At least according to Trump. I think Beijing is like, what are you talking about? Trump is no longer attacking Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And then Elon Musk is saying that his time at DOGE is going to start to kind of wind down. But what do you make of all of that?
Look, I think that there is, in many quarters of our politics right now, a hunger for radical change to a society that they feel is broken in some way. Whether you are on the left and think that capitalism is broken and destroying America and Americans, or whether you're on the right and think that the economy is broken and it serves the interests of capital owning elites and the professional middle class, but not us ordinary folks. And those people hunger for radical action, not just radical change, right? They want to do huge things. They want to come in and, whether it is breaking up big tech companies or breaking up the global financial order, they want a radical reshaping of the world. And the problem with that is that there's not actually any appetite for that among voters. Voters did not elect Donald Trump to wreck the world economy. They elected him to make the economy grow and get inflation down. His base may want that. There is a portion of his base that definitely does want that, but most voters don't. And Trump himself wants to do a bunch of stuff like pass trillions of dollars of unfunded tax cuts that he can't do if the yields on our bonds keep rising. One of the things is this was probably personally impoverishing him and all of his Silicon Valley supporters. And that just wasn't a viable thing. And I think that in some ways American institutions, for all of their problems, work really pretty well. The Pax Americana has been really pretty good for the world. The United States has abused its power as the issuer of the reserve currency, as the owner of the world's biggest and most powerful military, less than any other historical entity that has occupied that position. And so while people complain and they're like, I want this to be different, what they're actually imagining is that they're going to hold all of the good stuff constant and only fix the stuff that they don't like. And that's not possible. It's a system. The stuff all works together. You can't wreck trade, but still we're going to be able to borrow cheap money and we're going to have the world's reserve currency and all of that. You can't just fix the reserve currency without messing with your bond yields and your stock market and all the stuff you don't want to touch. That's true on the left as well. I mean, so I think about the Great Awakening and all of these left-leaning mainstream institutions, whether it's academia, whether it is the media, and also at some just left institutions like progressive nonprofits. And what those people looked at those institutions and saw, these institutions have an enormous amount of power and influence. And that influence is being used for dumb stuff like promoting capitalism. And what I want to use it for is social justice. And look, these people had good motives. They thought they were going to make the world better. What they didn't understand was that the power they wanted to deploy was reputational capital, which in many ways is also true of Trump, right? Like, yes, we have a military and that backstops a lot of the other things we do. But our position in global financial markets was a little bit about the fact that we have the biggest economy and a military, and a lot about reputational capital, about the fact that we have a reputation for being a good place to adjudicate your disputes over, say, the bonds that you want to issue, which is why more than half of emerging market debt is actually issued in New York under New York law, because people do not trust the host countries that if you borrow money under their law, that a court's going to enforce your claim to the debt. They trust America. They trust our institutions. And that's really valuable. That makes you richer. And people take that for granted. They don't understand that reputational capital is, while extremely powerful, also way more fragile than you think. Right.
Absolutely.
So what these people did, I actually just filed a column on this, and the example I gave is like, look, what if Moody's started rating bonds not on boring stuff like, is their cash flow high enough to cover the bond payments, right? Instead, they were like, no, we have a higher calling than capitalism. Now we're going to rate bonds on how diverse the workforce is and what the gender balance is. And do they have equitable CEO pay policies? And are their products good for the environment? Now, you might agree that those things matter more than some dumb profit. You might admire Moody's for taking this stand, but when you're investing your 401k and you see a bond that Moody's has rated AAA, you're probably going to think, you know what? I'm just going to go check with some boring old fogey rater that uses the old metrics rather than whether they are curing cancer, like they're curing poverty with their products. And that's reputational capital, right? And once you've given it up, even if Moody's went back to the old ways, you would think to yourself, okay, yeah, but they're the kind of company that does that. Are they putting their thumb on the scale for products that they think are politically good? Because while I want that, I mostly want my 401k to support me in retirement. And you saw that at a lot of at the public trust in the media, in all sorts of expertise from public health to other stuff. I mean, I think, transgender medicine is an area where public trust was visibly higher in 2017. It's one of the few issues where if you look at public trust in 2017, people trusted what these experts were saying, and now very few people trust what these experts are saying who are not pretty progressive. And that collapse in institutional trust is one of the things that, for example, has given Trump space to attack the universities. Conservatives have wanted to do this for a long time, right? You and I both know this, that the amount of complaining about liberal bias in academia and how these people are all radicals and they need to be taken down a peg. That's been going on for a long time, but what constrained that, and conservatives have always had a lot of tools to do this, by the way, right? They could have eliminated the subsidy for student loans. They could have taxed the endowments of these universities. They could have ended the tax exemption for operating a university. Those were all tools. They could have, cut Pell Grants. They could have cut research funding. This has been an option for a long time. Why didn't they do this? Well, in part because some Republican establishment people believe in these universities. But another big reason is that voters believed in these universities. Voters would have freaked out if you had cut their ability to send their kid to an elite school. Republican voters would have freaked out. And that level of public trust, that love of the universities, that constraint is really, really relaxed now. If you look at it, the only group who expresses a majority high confidence in institutions of higher education is now Democrats. And even it's 56%. 44% of your coalition does not express high confidence in these institutions. That trust evaporated over the space of about 10 years. It's also true of the media. And again, look, conservatives were always hostile and skeptical towards the media, but not at the levels that they now are, where we're somewhere between used car salesmen and the people who hawk supplements on television. And that's new. We torched an enormous amount of credibility pursuing this political project. And so look, if you were in the media, if you were in academia in 2023, it looked like, wow, there has been this total progressive victory. They now have control over basically what the institution is going to say and do about a large number of the most politically sensitive topics. And that victory has proven entirely Pyrrhic, both because the institutions themselves developed some resistance to it over time, but also because what they were trying to do was deploy the incredible public trust. They wanted to use the incredible public trust to advance belief in their causes. And the thing was, that was happening to some extent. The fact that these institutions leaned left for decades did nudge public policy and consensus towards the progressive side. Not as far as progressives wanted, obviously, but it was definitely a factor that it helped Democrats win. It helped Democratic and progressive issues win. And that's gone. So they not only didn't get what they wanted in terms of this totalizing, progressive vanguard. They lost what they already had in terms of a significant ability to influence public opinion on issues they cared about. They destroyed it. They got nothing out of it. They just torched all this reputational capital for nothing. And that should worry Republicans, who are really enjoying that fact right now. They're really enjoying the fact that they can dance on the woke grave. But they should look at that and think, that's what happens when you try to take reputational capital and spend it on your personal project, because reputational capital is all about convincing other people, this is the thing we do. We're not going to abuse this for our own personal ends, for our ideological project. Whether that is, these are the things we do in the global financial system. We are basically responsible. We don't start stupid trade wars that are not even predictable, right? If he had just slapped like 25% tariffs on China or 50% tariffs on China, that would have been bad. I would have disagreed with that decision. But the totally ad hoc nature of these tariffs, where they're on, they're off, and they're high, they're low.
But isn't that Donald Trump's MO? And that's where I wanted to go with this. Right now, Trump is declining in popularity. His approval ratings are down; they're crashing.
He's joining us with the used car salesmen and the,
exactly.
the supplement hawkers.
But I think that Donald Trump is behaving in perfectly predictable. Number one, he was president for 4 years. Yes, he didn't do everything the same. Yes, but he's always been capricious. And if you believe, he's basically everything that as a Reagan conservative I believe in, he's on the other side of, including the unpredictability. And so the why didn't voters, if voters want stability and certainty, and why didn't they see this coming?
I think for a few reasons. Number one, it didn't happen before. And you have to remember how low information most voters are. We spend all of our time immersed in the ins and outs, the day-to-day of politics. And it is easy to forget that most people can't even name a Supreme Court justice. They don't know who their senator is. They probably couldn't tell you who controls the Senate and the House. Right? Something has to be a really big high salience issue for most people to notice. If you read a newspaper, you're already in the top 20% of people or a daily news site. If you read one every day, you're already in the top 20% for political engagement. So people were just past performance, future results. I want the economy of 2019.
COVID hit. He was woefully unprepared. And I think there was a ton of chaos before.
Yes, and I think people didn't like the chaos, but let me tell the story that I think a lot of voters told themselves in ex ante. Right? I mean, so first of all, they're not equipped to and this is not a slam on people, right? I'm not equipped to tell you how my car works. No fucking idea. Pardon my language. I mean, you could tell me that there are leprechauns in there, running around on little treadmills, and I wouldn't be able to.
The flux capacitor is not working.
Yes,
it's going to be $2,000.
Everyone has stuff where they basically understand the mechanics and stuff where they basically don't. And it's good that there are many different kinds of those knowledge in society, not just the kind I happen to have. But if you are a budget wonk and Trump says he's going to cut taxes on overtime and Social Security, that sounds insane. Because you understand how that's going to percolate out, that either we're going to have these big budget deficits, it will push up our interest costs, right? You understand what's going on inside the engine. But most people don't. And most people are they're just looking at the world and they say, well, people who work overtime, those people are working really hard. And we should reward that. And that's not a stupid thing to think. It's just that it's impractical to execute, because you would then have to take the money back from someone else who's also working really hard, right? And
let me just cut in real. I don't want to I just want to put a pause there and just make a gratuitous statement. This is to my family. Okay, using Megan's analogy, if I were a professional mechanic and you wanted to go to a mechanic and he was telling you a bunch of bullshit that I knew would blow up your car, I would hope you would listen to me as a family member and someone who knows about that industry. This does not apply to politics, mind you. Nobody will listen when I'm saying this is going to happen. If tariffs, even in my, a prophet is not accepted in his own hometown, but even within my family, if I said, like, let me tell you what tariffs are going to do and how this is going to play out, nobody would listen. Okay.
I spent 2 decades writing about healthcare. I covered Obamacare extensively. My dear late mother would not believe me when I told her that there was no, it's not even saying Obamacare is bad. We can argue about the merits of Obamacare as a policy. I was against it, but I was saying there is no easy way. There's no cheap way to wring money out of the system and cut costs and give people more coverage. Right? That's actually really expensive because the expenses in the system are mostly stuff we do. It's not insurance company profits. She would not believe me. And she was like, Megan, I think that's just your ideology. I was like, no, actually, this is one where I promise I'll get Ezra Klein in here, Mom. Just wait. I'm going to call him right now. And he can tell you that there's no way to do this because there isn't. Right? That's just stuff that all the healthcare wonks know. But I think we all do this, right? We look at the world and we say, come on, there has to be a better way than this. And it is incredibly frustrating that there isn't an easy, better way that doesn't involve like cutting the income of someone I really like my doctor. But there isn't often. And I think that's it. But let me tell you the story that I think those people tell themselves, right? Is part of it is that like he's saying things that sound like, I want to reward people who work hard. And if you look at, there was a recent report out on why Democrats are failing with the working class. And this is a theme that comes up over and over, is that the working class thinks that Democrats give too much money to people who don't work. The working class wants to work. They want to be rewarded for their hard work. They want an economy that rewards their hard work more. And so that's what a lot of his proposals sound like. I'm rewarding ordinary people who worked really hard and maybe they're retired now and they just deserve a little extra because they put in the effort. And I think there's a lot to like about that vision of society, actually, of a vision that's reciprocal, where you can get ahead if you are, where we take care of you if you really can't take care of yourself, and we're more of a community, right? So that's one thing. Number two is the economy. They want the economy of 2019, where labor markets were tight, where everything wasn't crazy. Yes, COVID, they don't blame him for what happened in COVID, in part because the experts got so much stuff so wrong. Right. And the experts, to go back to the torching of institutional capital, one of the worst examples of that was all the people who said, no, my God, you can't go to church. You'll kill people. No, you can't go to your uncle's funeral. You'll kill people. Protesting George Floyd. Of course you can go.
Yeah.
Right. And and I understand, because I move in this world enough, I understand how that happens. First of all, there was a letter from 1,400 public health experts. I would bet that a significant minority and possibly a majority of the people who signed that letter didn't want to and harbored private reservations. And they felt that, but they understood that the ascendant power in their departments would make their life a living hell, right? I've heard these stories over and over again about grad students who didn't want to sign various letters, but the person like hands it to them and stands over them. And they know that if they say, well, maybe I don't want to sign this letter, it will be an interrogation on why they're a bigot. And so, right, these activists were pretty good at mustering sort of ersatz support for their causes and making them appear to be more influential than they actually were. These people, and what they thought, they were afraid. People in these institutions were really, really afraid during George Floyd. It was true in the media. It was true. They were afraid of what could happen to them, right? I watched my old boss, James Bennett, just get summarily sacked from the New York Times because an internal mob came after him. That is just bound to be a frightening thing.
This is the Tom Cotton letter or op-ed.
Yeah, this is the Tom Cotton op-ed. He ran an opinion that I don't personally agree with, which is that we should have deployed the U.S. military to quell riots, not peaceful protests, just riots. But which was the majority opinion in the United States. And James Bennett got fired for doing that in a completely outrageous abandonment of basic journalistic integrity. But so people were afraid, and they thought, if I say something, and I know that a lot of people harbored private reservations and were afraid to say something because I've spoken to those people. And so they just thought, well, look, how big a deal is this? These are outside. A lot of people are going to be wearing masks. It's not that big a deal. Just let the activists have what they want because, racism is bad. George Floyd is an outrage, etc. And that decision was the most disastrous thing they could possibly have done. The signal that they were trying to send was a coalitional member, like a message of support to other coalition members. The signal they actually sent was progressive politics is more important, is what actually drives our decision making. And so these people, yes, was Trump shambolic? Did he ignore experts, etc.? But they're like, look at the experts. Look at the way that they colluded with the teachers unions to keep schools closed for bizarrely long periods of time. Right, the CDC obviously let teachers unions influence their decisions on that.
Yeah, but I think you could also argue that Trump went along with those experts. He was the government that shut things down in many ways.
But he was seen, and the media portrayed him as being at war with those experts. And so when you say, but he ignored the experts, people are like, yeah, I know. Isn't that great? He ignored those politicized morons. And I think that, and look, I'm not defending this. I was on Team Lockdown. I did not think he did a good job, but
yeah, I just think it's miraculous how he can pull off being the president at the time that the shutdowns happen, doing what the experts tell him to do, and yet still being the savior of the common man against the experts. It's really remarkable, but he masterfully does it.
He did override them, which is more than most politicians can say, right? More than any Democratic politician can say is that he was like, no, that's too much. I know you guys have valued every life saved at 100% and the economy at 0. But that's not the trade-off that most people wanted to make, and I'm making the trade-off they want to make. A lot of people responded to that, especially
I don't want to
working-class voters who lost their jobs. And I don't
want to relitigate COVID too much, but my recollection is it was really Ron DeSantis and Brian Kemp who were actually the tip of the spear at doing, sort of sane things. Then Trump was critical of them at the time, as I recall.
So he also, I think, for example, masks, he was one of the first people to be like, no, not wearing one. A decision that looks a lot better in hindsight now that we have better research on how well masks work, which is, it does not actually seem like they did anything. Certainly that mask mandates did anything. I know that this is going to be a contentious statement. Some people are going to get angry at me for saying this, but I'm sorry, if you look at the counties that social distancing works. Not being in a room with someone who is sick makes it very hard to get sick. Vaccines clearly work, but the mortality rates between red and blue states actually don't diverge that much. A little bit, but I would
think
expect
they do after the vaccine.
After the vaccine.
Yeah,
right. So the actual what's driving that difference is mostly vaccination. Vaccination absolutely works, 100%. Vaccination good, get all of them, but in fact, the masks weren't that helpful. And the fact that the establishment first said they didn't work because they were trying to preserve them for healthcare workers, and then said that they did. Again, if you look at all the ways in which the expert class beclowned itself, the fact that Trump was seen as part of the DeSantis, Kemp, etc. coalition opposing them helps him. I'm not even arguing who had the merits. I'm just saying,
I totally agree with you, and you're obviously right, it's just empirically right. But I do feel like there's this amazing asymmetry where the experts have to be right, and the institutions, the establishment, whatever, they have to be right every time. And Trump, meanwhile, can say insane, crazy things constantly, and he is always getting this grace, which is, well, but you have to understand. Whereas everyone else is held to this incredibly high standard of perfection, he says insane things that we don't even remember because there's so many.
I think that that's right, but I also think that part of the problem is that the experts claimed a level of authority that implied that they were right 100% of the time. Right, if you were telling people they can't go to church or attend their family's funerals, or they have to wear
Yeah.
masks so that they have to get a shot, you had better be 100% right. Right? If you were claiming the right to force someone to inject something into their body, and to be clear, when I still thought there was a possibility of herd immunity, I actually supported vaccine mandates. So I am not, but like, you have to be pretty right if you're going to disrupt people's lives to the level that the experts did. Or at least you have to offer some humility. They didn't want to do that. They were trying to do, I think Matt Iglesias called it, he once said, which I think is a really good way to think about the mistakes the public health establishment made. And he said, I wish they would spend more time telling us what they know and what they don't, and less time trying to conduct some sort of high level psyop on the American population to get to kind of like trick them into doing the stuff that the public health experts think is probably the best course.
Yeah.
And that is one reason that their credibility was undermined. And I think that is so. Again, I think that there's a real danger that Republicans are now just rejecting expertise out of hand, and that's
Yeah. But
throwing the baby out with the
you,
bathwater.
the way we got into this rabbit hole of relitigating
Yeah,
COVID
sorry.
was you were basically making the point that voters don't hold COVID against Trump, and
They
they
don't.
see his first term apparently as having been successful. I don't remember thinking it was very good at all, even before COVID, but they do for reasons I don't fully understand.
Because for low wage workers, the economy got a lot better. The labor market was tight at the bottom of the market. And if you were if you were making less than $80,000 a year, less than $50,000 a year, jobs were plentiful. There were bidding wars for workers. It was a good time to be you. Interest rates were incredibly low, so you could finance a house, you could finance a car. Credit terms were pretty easy. And the reason they remember it as being good is that it was in fact better for them than now. And I
Was it
also
better
think,
for them than Obama?
yeah, yeah. I mean, like in absolute terms, the growth was not as good, but on the other hand, Obama was rebounding from 10% employment, right? Yeah, they were doing better at the end of the until the pandemic hit, obviously, right? They were doing better than they had under Obama. And that's why they remember it as being better. They didn't have inflation. And I also think that you have to ask about their expectations at the end of the pandemic. So during the pandemic, both Trump and Biden pump an unbelievable amount of borrowed money into the economy. I mean, trillions and trillions and trillions
Yes.
of dollars, right? Much of which goes into personal hands, right? At one point, the unemployment system is paying people more not to work than they've been paid to work. So for people who are at the bottom, and by the way, all that happened under Trump, because as Biden comes in, almost all of it happens under Trump. And again, to be clear, I supported a lot of this, not every single thing that they did, but I supported a lot of what they did. It was an unprecedented emergency. I think that what we did kept the economy from kind of coming out slow. And I think you see that in the difference between our recovery and Europe's, for example. By the end of the pandemic, you have this massive inflation in household balance sheets, and especially in the bottom few quintiles, where they suddenly have more cash than they have ever had. They're sitting on a very tight job market where you can just walk onto the street and someone will grab you and give you a job. So they're sitting on this big pile of cash, and they start to dream about not doing, and this is a thing that in 2021, 2022, there is something called what people are talking about, the Great Resignation,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
where
I remember.
people are saying, no, you know what? I don't like working at the front desk of a hotel. I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to do something like this. And so they're looking at their position in early 2021, and they are optimistic about the future. And again, because this is right after Trump, he's getting some of the credit for this, even though he didn't win the election, et cetera. He's getting a lot of the credit for this because Biden hasn't done much yet. He mails out one check. And then the inflation hits. And the inflation hits under Biden. And all of those dreams evaporate because it turns out, no, you're not going to spend your all that big pile of cash on getting a new life. It turns out what you're going to spend it on is maintaining the life you have. And that was inevitable, to be clear, right? None of that money had created new goods and services. It was always going to be spent on a bidding war for the stuff that exists. And we had supply chain shocks as well. But of course, again, they didn't. I saw this coming in 2020, and I talked to people about it, but they didn't see it coming. And so, if you think about their experience under Biden, is they start out with this incredible optimism, and then there's this huge burst of inflation that eats their savings, and now they're back to the same lousy job they had before, and real wages aren't growing as fast as they did under Trump. I mean, there's a rebound, but then, you just got a lot of inflation. Things are tight. Interest rates are going up because inflation's going up. The housing market's frozen because you've got all these people sitting on their low interest rate mortgages who will never, ever move. I'm one of them. And the economy just looks a lot worse, especially for those people in the bottom quintiles, than it did under Trump. And then the media just starts, and I get why that happened, right? There was, things weren't as bad as conservatives were arguing, but they were not great. And when people are like, why don't people recognize how great the Biden economy is? It's like, no, this is a dead cat bounce from the fact that we closed half the economy for a year. Yes, it is growing, but it is not growing in the big, exciting way you want to. It's a kind of modest, meh growth. And there's a lot of inflation, and that doesn't hit us as hard as it's hitting people at the bottom. And all of this just sucks. And that thing, yeah, that's why they wanted Trump. They
Wow.
looked at
Okay.
their personal experiences and thought, yeah, things were better.
So you have successfully taught me why, despite I see Trump when he was campaigning talking about how he's going to pay for education with tariffs. I know that's bullshit or super dangerous. I see Trump launching his campaign saying his number one goal is retribution, which scares the hell out of me.
Mm-hmm.
But you have just now very successfully explained to me why to maybe a average American or working class American, from their standpoint, why it is rational that they voted for Trump. So thank you for that. And I know we have limited time, so let's now look forward. So all the stuff that's happening now, right? Trump has imposed these tariffs. He's walked back the reciprocal tariffs. There's still these hugely high tariffs on China, which he may be walking away from. He was threatening to fire Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, presumably because he won't lower interest rates. He seems to have backed away from that. You've got DOGE, which fired a bunch of people. Elon seems to be, fading into the background now. We may be walking away from Ukraine, which could lead to an Afghanistan-like withdrawal outcome. And not a perfect analogy, but it could get ugly. Where do you see? It's a lot to talk. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. Where do you see it going from here, Megan?
I mean, I think we're going to abandon Ukraine. I think that was always in the cards. I'm against that, but that's what I think is going to happen. I think that Trump is scared by what he's done. I think he did not understand how vehement the reaction of markets would be. He did not understand that. I mean, reportedly, the CEOs of Walmart and Target just went to him and said, and Home Depot, and said, you don't understand, not only are prices going up, our shelves are going to be empty in 3 weeks, right? You're going to start seeing gaps on our shelves because container shipping volumes have fallen by 60%. I don't think he understood that things were going to move quite that quickly, that the reaction was going to be as strong. And I think the danger, and this goes back to my long rant about institutional capital on the left, is you don't just go back to the status quo, right? The media certainly has pulled considerably back from the Great Awakening. And our reputation is going to take a long time to recover among the people who don't trust us. It's not going to be, oh, well, but we're not doing that anymore. They're going to say, yeah, but you did it, which means I don't trust your decisions.
Not only could Trump be losing the voters, the middle America.
No, he's losing the markets. He's losing.
And possibly our allies too, right? I mean, yeah,
right.
It's everything.
And people were willing to give us a one-time buy on Trump in 2016 because he won this in this weird way with the Electoral College. But people are now just saying, nope, you did it. This could happen again. Don't trust it. Don't want all my money there. Don't want to be so reliant on my trade relations. And that's going to take a long time to repair. And I think Trump thinks he can just be like, okay, well, I was kidding. And to some extent that is true. Like, you can see this with markets. Every time he's like, well, I had Chinese food for dinner, they're like, oh, he's going to take the tariffs off, and the stock market goes up. But it's going to take an enormous, decades to repair the damage that he has done in the space of a few months.
And on that happy note,
yeah,
this was educational, enlightening, and I'm grateful. Megan McArdle, anything you want to plug, or how can people read you?
I am at the Washington Post, and may I say, our subscriptions are a fantastic value right now. But I'm at the Washington Post. I'm on podcasts everywhere, including the high quality ones like Matt Lewis, although I don't get to do those as often as I'd like.
Megan McArdle, thanks for coming on the pod.
Take care.